This video is sponsored by Game Toppers. Turn your own kitchen or dining room table into a premium portable game solution at a fraction of the cost. Hey everybody, welcome to Drive Thru Review 760. Today we're going to talk about Endless Winter Paleo Americans. This is a brand new game just being distributed by Fantasia and Asmodee. What this game is, obviously you can tell by the cover and kind of the title, is you are playing kind of somewhat prehistoric tribal folks, and you're going to be sort of taking over area, hunting, getting kind of new recruits and roles and different kind of jobs in your tribe, all through the progress of deck building, worker placement, area control, all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of a smorgasbord of kind of Euro style mechanics, and also kind of a point salad in a way of different ways to kind of score points. Lots of different kind of interlocking systems and mechanisms. So let's go down to the table. I'll show you how the game kind of works, and then I'll come back and I will tell you what I think of it. Okay, so there's kind of a lot going on in terms of the footprint, the visual sort of pieces of the game. So let's kind of really briefly talk about all those. So here you have kind of your main sort of player board here. There's 4 kind of worker placement spots, people putting workers out doing actions there. There's some bonus tiles they can buy along that side there. This is set up for a 2-player game. If there's more players, there'll be more in that top row there. And then you've got kind of a score track around the edge there. And then just below that, you're going to have kind of a supply of cards here. And you've got 1 row of tribe cards, which are always the same with the base game. There's expansions that will change up this row of tribe cards here, this top row. And then you have these culture cards here. And these are somewhat randomized out of 2 decks. So this is kind of era 1 and then era 2, and you put this card over it to make sure you don't draw from this until you get halfway through the game. Then you'll wipe out the era 1s, put this over on top of that, and then you'll start dealing cards out of this. And these are all different unique cards and give you different special powers and stuff. And then let's see, over here you have kind of the area board over here. You can see there's little tents or teepees, and they are going to grow, and players are going to put more of their colored pieces out there, and then also start to put some village pieces out there. So you're trying to taking control and trying to get, let's zoom in just a little bit here, some of these bonuses like this guy here. In the eclipse phase, for example, you can get an extra tool if you control that spot. And then zooming way out here and then panning all the way over here. We're going to take a look here. Here's the hunting area. There's different animals that you can hunt, and you can collect these, you can eat these, you can do different things with them. This is the totem board over here. There's kind of 2 separate tracks to go up. And then you have down here, this is for building megaliths, and players have these little square blocks in their color that they will put out on these various different pieces there to kind of claim bonuses and things like that. It's kind of just kind of a fancy bonus board. And then if we zoom out just a little bit more, we can see there's, like I said, I've got this set up for 2 players. You've got the different player boards here with some cards and some pieces and so on. So you've got a deck of cards that you're going to be using, some workers, some generic workers, and then you also have a leader here. So it gives you a miniature here, which you can kind of see. Then you clip a base of your color on, and you also have a choice here when you get this dealt this worker or this leader of kind of 2 special abilities that it can give you. And what this is telling you, this is the type of worker placement action space that I showed you at the beginning on the main board. So if you go here with your leader, then you get a bonus tool, or if you go here, you get 2 food. And that's when you take that action with that leader, not with your other guys. So what's going to happen to start the game, you'll get some starting resources here. You get a little card randomly dealt out. It'll tell you how much food and how much tools you start with. Everybody has the same basic deck of cards, but the starting card that will deal out to you will tell you, hey, you get also an extra elder here, or you might get an extra craftsman or something like that. So you get one of these starting tribe cards into your deck as well. And then you might also get some of these animal cards here in front of you that you'll put down here at the bottom of your board, which you can either collect or eat. So for example, this one's actually a wild. So if you collect sets of these, this can add to that, and it shows you there's 5 of them. And if you tip them or eat them, then this will give you 2 progress on the different totem track. Whereas let's just take a different example here. This ground sloth there, if you tip them, you get a tool and 4 food. And then you can see if you collect a set of 1, 2, 3, or 4 or more of them, you get that many points at the end of the game. So you'll start off with 1 or 2 of those in your supply here. And again, your first tent here is going to go out onto that board there in the center, in the kind of the central camp area, and you'll be putting more of these out in more of your villages. And then again, these are for the megalith and some areas for different bonuses. So the way that the game works, a turn works, is you're going to play basically just 4 rounds, and you're going to have 1 round of worker placement. And when you put your workers out, you can do a couple things. The first thing you can do before you put your worker out is you can play one of these culture cards. And the cultures have these pelts. And so these are Era 1 cultures. And these are actually sort of asymmetrically given to the yellow player. They start with a couple here, and you can get extras, of course, like I said, through the course of the game. So you can play one of these for free. And so in this case, you can see you can spend a food to get one of those tribe cards and put it in your discard pile, or you could spend a tool to build a megalith. And so you can play one of those for free. If you want to play a second one, you have to discard a card to pay for the second one, and so on, as you want to play more of those. Usually you only play 1 or 2 of them. So you do that, and then what you'll do is you'll place a worker out on one of the 4 spaces, and then you can spend these other cards, these tribe cards. And everybody starts with these kind of basic tribesmen here, and these all provide 1 labor. You can see they all provide labor. But we have here example here, tribeswoman. She provides 1.5 labor. And then also a special ability here, when you use her as part of your worker placement action, you can turn a food into a tool. Or let's take a look at some of these other tribe cards here, like so. For example, the elder. So if we placed our worker on this action space, which I'll show you, you get a bonus labor in addition to the labor there. And then the same thing here with the crafter. If you place it in the crafting space, you get an extra labor. So these help you kind of be more specific and more powerful in those different spots there. So the players are going to go back and forth doing that, and then you're going to have the eclipse phase. And so if you held cards back for the eclipse phase, you're actually going to contribute their labor instead to trying to win the eclipse, so to speak, and basically trying to win turn order. And then any of the actions here that are on the cards will also trigger during the eclipse phase. And there's a bunch of other stuff that triggers during the eclipse phase, which we'll get to. But you're basically trying to hold these cards for either the worker placement phase or for kind of the end of round eclipse phase. So let's look at our first example here on this spot here. You can see this icon right there that kind of matches the elder icon, and it's right underneath. If I zoom out just a little bit here, you can see the elder card is right underneath that track there. And so if I had this here, again, if I played that along with that, that's going to give me a bonus because I went there. So what's going to happen is there's kind of 2 or actually 3 areas to this spot. Now this first kind of light blue area here, you can do this part as many times as you want. So I could spend a tool and a labor, and I can buy X number of different tribe cards. That's what that little symbol means up at the top here. So there's only 5 different ones. So if I spent 5 tools and 5 labor, then I could go pick up and grab all 5 of these and put them right into my hand. And then this next spot here you can do once. So I could spend a food, grab one of those tribes cards, put it in my discard pile, and then bury a card. So let's talk about burying a card real quick. So here's a spot where you can bury cards, and you can put them under this card, and this is just kind of a reference for the end game bonus that you might get for burying cards. So you can stack all those cards. Let's say we buried this card here like that, and then maybe later we buried that. So we can just stick those under there, and then we can see we're trying to usually bury at least 7 cards, and I'll explain how this scores at the end. But when you bury cards, you put them there, and it kind of gives you an end game bonus. And it's a way for you to thin your deck, because these are just kind of basic tribesmen. All I do is give you a labor. There's no special abilities. So you might want to have something like, the crafter in here who helps you out on the crafting spot, but also in the eclipse phase gives you 2 tools, which is a little bit better. So after you've done this action as many times as you want, you do this action once. If you're the first person to go here, then you can take and put your worker there and kind of claim that spot, and you get that one-time bonus. In this case, you get to go up the totem track and bury a card. Then other players can come in here all they want, and they can do these actions. They just won't get this bonus spot right there. They'll just kind of live down there, and then you can go back there as well yourself and take that action. So this spot here is a good spot to get a lot of cards in your deck, and it's worth noting that these are all worth 1 point there at the end of the game, so it's good for that. And this is also good because most of the time you're putting those cards into your discard pile. This spot you're going right into your hand, so you can use them, right away. So this next spot here, you can see you can spend 3 labor, and that's how you get more of these culture cards. These are kind of these one-time effects that you play at the start of your turn. or you can spend a certain amount of food and tools to get one of these bonus tiles up the top there. I'm not going to explain any of these. These are just bonuses for the things that you're already planning on doing for the course of the game. But let's say we'll just take this one here, for example. You'll spend a certain amount of food and tools and put that out there. And then of course you get the bonus, you get a food and a tool right back. But let's look at our player board. So as you can see, you got 3 spots for these. The first one costs you 1 tool and 2 food, 1 tool and 2 food, and so on. And they give you a little bonus when you cover them up. So if when I buy my first one, I get to bury a card. And then I get to add, new cards to my deck. So I'll put that there, and this is going to provide me bonuses during the eclipse phase, during the income. So basically for each village, that's one of these things here, I get to get 2 points that are touching these little kind of foresty types of tiles there. So if I plan on, spreading out into forest, this might be a good idea to grab. Then I'll get 2 points for each of those on every eclipse phase. Now moving over to the next spot, this is how you get your tents out and your villages. So you can see you can spend, in this case, a couple of things. You can spend a tool to deploy and put out a new village in the center. You can spend a labor to move a village 1 space. And then one time you can spend 3 food to sort of spend and remove those 3 villages off the board, or those 3 tents, and then put out a village. And then the bonus is you get to put down a tent and then move a tent. I think I mixed up tents and villages. We're going to see the example though here in a second. So when you see the symbol to put out a tent, you're always going to drop it down there in the middle. When you see the little icon to move it, you're going to move it 1 space. If you could move it multiple times, you could split that movement, or you could move, one a whole bunch. There is an optional sort of add-on thing, this glacier thing, where you can put these tiles on top of these normally worthless, icy glaciers. And when you move your tent through there, you don't have to actually build it. You flip that over and you get like a little bonus. And so this here will give you a bonus there when you get to, you get to put a card in your discard pile, and then you get to bury a card. And so these all do different things like so. And then the other thing is when you spend the 3 food, once you have 3 of these tents here, kind of in a concentric thing, you can see this little circle spot. I can spend those, pull these off my board, and try to put them back out later. And then I can put out a village. And so that's all you have to do is just have 3 there. So at the end of the eclipse phase, to get the bonuses on these tiles, you have to control that. So each tent on here is worth 1 influence point, and each village exerts 2 influence points on all of those. So in this case, if red and yellow were competing for this one, then yellow would win because they got 2 plus 1 is 3 to the red's 1, and then they would get to build a megalith there because of that icon. And so, you try to spread out, and there's some contesting for this, and then you build the villages. Now, the other benefit for building a village is you get to draw an extra card into your hand at the end of the round. Normally you draw 5 cards. There's no hand limit. You don't have to discard all the cards in your hand. You can save cards, but this is nice because it gives you a bonus, and each of these gives you a bonus card to draw at the end of the round. And the other thing to note here is as your tents go out, then it also increases the maximum amount of food that you can store. And it also is worth noting, and something that I have learned over the course of later games after my first game, that you can actually spend these. So once you drop this down and it goes past a labor, that's another way to add additional labor to your worker placement action beyond just having the cards. And you can see that it gets a little bit more expensive, but as your food goes down, it becomes a little cheaper to add labor. And I would say don't be afraid to spend that, because that helps you boost a lot of actions and do a little bit better. So that's another thing to note there. Now the last spot here has to do with the hunting and eating of the animals. And so you can spend labor here to draw 2 new animals, spend a tool and a labor to draw it into your supply, and then you can one time tip one and eat it, and then this one is the first place in there. So the last spot has to do with the hunting and eating of animals, and you can see you can spend labor to draw new ones for you to choose from in general supply, which you'll see. You can spend tools and labor to actually draw it and put it in your personal supply. One time you can tip and eat them. Like you saw, you can get different effects for them. And then of course the first person here gets to draw one off the top of the deck directly into their supply. So to start the game, depending on the number of players, there'll be a certain amount of available animals here, but at most there can be 6 in the face-up display. So you might spend some labor to draw a couple of more to see what's there. and then you get a better choice when you start to spend your tools to draw them. And then, so you can interact with them this way. So there's always a display of like, at least a few, up to 6 different animals that you can pick from for that spot. So the other two things we haven't talked about are the megalith and the little totem board. So let's just pop down here, look at the megalith. And this is just a little bonus spot. So whenever you get this icon, you can put something out. So you can see in this arrangement here of these pieces, it changes based on player count. And you can see everybody starts with 2 sort of neutral ones. And then there's a bunch in their color that come off their player board. So the neutral ones are the only ones that can go in this spot. So you always have to start with placing those. And when you put these here, you get a free bonus placement to start to move them out. So you can see if I put that there, okay, I get my free one, then I put that, and then I get 2 food. And now anybody can place either a gray one in the starter areas, or they can start to place their colored ones adjacent to any existing ones. Doesn't have to be your color. So here I can go and get 2 cards, maybe go here. And then the last thing that you can do is put one on top like that. And there you actually score points. So you will get 2 points for each of yours that you covered. You get 1 point for the one you placed, and then 1 point for each of the other ones that aren't your color that are underneath there. And if they happen to be somebody else's underneath there, like let's say one of these was yellow, then yellow would also get a point for that. So that's how the megalith works. It's kind of a little bonus area. And then finally here, you can start to move your figures up these tracks here on the totem board like so. And there's basically 2 sort of end game scorings. Here you can see as you go up, you get little bonuses as you move up. And then basically for every 3 resources, tools and food, you'll get a bonus point. Whereas if you get all the way up here, it's for every 2. So it improves your multiplier. And then on this side is for figuring out who's first, so to speak, on the berry card track. So let's say it was like this, orange was, or red was there, yellow was down there. So we'd say, okay, let's look at our bonus cards. And let's say red had buried 6 cards. So red is first, so we're gonna look at this top box. They buried 6 cards, so they get 10 points. Now yellow had buried more cards. They buried maybe 7, but they're in second place, and they still get 10 points. If they buried less cards, they get 6, and so on. And then everybody else after that gets this amount based on how many cards they buried. And you do have to at least start on the track to get some points there. So the last thing to talk about is the eclipse phase, and the players can actually do a little worker placement thing, which we'll look at. We're just going to zoom down here real quick. And you can see this spot here on your board. So if you don't want to go out on the board, you can put your guy here. What this will do is allow you to draw a card and then tip or eat an animal, and it's going to give you 1.5 labor towards the eclipse phase, which you can sort of combine with any other cards here that you might have held back for the eclipse phase, and you can contribute their labor to that as well. And then whoever is highest and has spent the most labor is then going to advance to the top here of this turn order track, which we've seen here. This is the order the players play in. And then if you break ties, whoever was underneath, will move up. And then you're going to get a bonus here for being in a certain spot. But this is also a player reference, because anytime that you get a bonus through card play or something like that, let's say, I got a megalith for uncovering a glacier tile or something like that. If I don't really feel like spending it on a megalith, then I can take anything underneath it. So say, you know what, I'd rather draw a card. I'd rather move up the monument track. I'd rather get a tool. I'd rather get a food. Anytime you get one that's higher through the course of play, you can grab one of the ones underneath, which is pretty neat. But that's how you're going to turn order based on, how many people contribute labor to the eclipse phase. And then you're going to get your different bonuses, like I said, off of the cards. Here, you're going to get bonuses for controlling different areas on the board. You're going to get any kind of income bonuses that were on your little totems here. So then at the end of the game, you're going to get all kinds of points from, let's see, all the cards that you bought. Those are going to be worth points. The tracks over here are going to be worth points. The sets that you collected of the animals are going to be worth points. And then, of course, any points that you have accrued during the game will have your kind of starting score at the end. There's one other thing, another little module. I don't think I mentioned the glacier tiles here. That's kind of a optional sort of thing, but it's part of the base game. There's also this other thing here, this little bonus thing up here, is the first player, let's focus that, to take the eclipse action on their player board can get this little bonus here. Or if they don't like that, they can discard that and then randomly take whatever's on top, and then it will go into the bottom. So only the first player to do that every round should use that, And just I would recommend playing with both those optional things, but that's another little thing there. Okay, so that was Endless Winter. Let's just jump right into my 3 pillars. First, we'll talk about player count. I've played it 1, 2, and 3 players. Not played it 4. I would say I don't really like it solo. It does this thing where it's like the automata thing or whatever, where you flip a card and then the one card sort of points to the other actions that it does. It's just kind of a pet peeve of mine, I guess, or not even a pet peeve. It's because I don't really have a huge problem with it. I just don't like it. Where like it'll say, okay, you block out this space with a worker and then do these other things. And it's like, well, that's not always related. And so that's just kind of, I don't know, it doesn't really do it for me as far as the solo goes. And I think you kind of miss out with some of the sort of tactical kind of back and forth and the competition for space and things like that, and the kind of the natural progression of, you know, what people are competing for and how the, you know, the megalith is unfolding, how the area board is unfolding. This doesn't really feel natural. Now, I would say out of the 2 and the 3, I probably liked the 2-player better. I think it's a really good 2-player game. It goes a little quicker with 2 players, and I imagine 4 players probably goes, you know, longer. But yeah, it's a real good, because it's a deck building game in a lot of ways. And so I find deck building games really do work very well at 2 players. When you add more, it's okay. But then if you have somebody that's kind of like lagging on their turn, then it's still like a deck building game. So just that extra time kind of sours it a little bit. But I still really enjoyed it with 3. Like I don't feel like my 3-player game took too long or anything, but I just really like the snappiness of the 2-player game and how that worked. So I think that would probably be my preference, although I would try it with 4, because the one thing that the 3-player game had that the 2-player didn't is it was a little bit more contested on the area board, where you're putting out your villages and your tents and that kind of stuff. And so the dynamics of that were more interesting. The dynamics of kind of the megalith and stuff were a little bit more interesting, but not really enough for me to like it more. Because it's really kind of heavy on the deck building. So I think, and for me, the 2-player kind of works better. But you know, that's going to kind of, you know, season to taste, I think, a little bit. Playtime, I kind of alluded to it, but it does seem to increase. What's the box tell me? Come on, box. Let's see if the box lies. I know I saw it on here somewhere. Hang on. I might have to edit this. Okay, no, there it is. So it's 1 to 2 hours. I think after you get to know the game, that's probably right. I think a 4-player game probably take longer than 2 hours, even if you know the game. But I don't know, there is a little bit of like, not like a learning curve to the game, but it's kind of a strategy curve, a tactical curve, something like that, because there's a lot going on with the game, and I'll just kind of move into what the game's like. So in some ways, it's a lot like a Dune Imperium, Lost Ruins of Arnak, Underwater Cities, you know, Ark Nova even, because very surface level, you've got worker placement, you've got deck building, and you've got kind of your card play going along with your worker placement. So it's kind of in that same general family. Now, it really does not feel anything like those games, because in this one you've got a lot of different systems going on. You've got the tracks and the megaliths and the animals you hunt and eat, and the deck building itself, which is part of the deal, which is kind of generating your resources, your tools, your food. And then you have, you know, of course, the territory area control part of it. But the deck building is really a big focus in this one, which is probably more so than I think any of those games that I mentioned. Although Underwater Cities and Ark Nova are not really deck building games, but Dune Imperium and Lost Ruins of Arnak definitely are. But I would say even above those 2 games, this is more focused on the deck building. And that's sort of I wouldn't say it's a complaint, but it's an issue that I've heard raised against Arnak and Dune Imperium, is that there's not really enough deck building for me in that game. For me, there's plenty in those games, but I've heard that complaint before. So I think if you kind of like those games or wanted to like them, but you wanted more deck building, this would be probably up your alley. And so, yeah, so this fits into all that. So the cool thing about this is working out all of the kind of combos and things that you can do, because you can generate and get a bunch of cards in your hand to use on your next round of worker placement. So that turn's going to be big, and then you can trigger a megalith, which is going to do this and give you the resource to do that, and then blah 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 and do that. And then you can also set up, and you shouldn't ignore those eclipse phases where you kind of do the end of round thing, because it's like, hey, taking that worker placement action on your player board just to kind of like draw a card and generate some eclipse labor, that's not totally, should not be ignored. I mean, because if you're going to keep some cards back for the eclipse stuff, some of those cards do some really cool things on the bottom, and that will allow you to kind of snatch certain areas and stuff like that that maybe people don't necessarily see you coming after during your normal worker placement phase. So that phase is pretty cool, and that's a lot like doing Imperium as well, where you have kind of you play cards during the normal phase, and then you hold it for, I can't remember what it's called in Dune Imperium, the buy phase, the reveal phase, I think it's called. So it has that kind of dynamic too, which is really cool, and they've really kind of zeroed in on that here, because you can do a lot of different stuff in that phase. And getting some of those income tiles and things like that are important, because you can generate a lot of points during the game, during that eclipse phase, if you have some of those good bonuses that give you a lot of extra income. And just in terms of that, one thing I noticed is, I don't think this bugs me anymore, but it did at first, because there's like kind of the phase 1 and the phase 2 little bonus tiles, these little like rock totem tiles that you get. The phase ones are kind of worthless compared to the phase 2 ones, but I think that's probably how it should be, because if you got one at the beginning and then you generated lots of income and you just blew everybody out of the water from the first part of the game, then they'd be kind of like a runaway leader. But in the ones in the first one, I feel like you can almost ignore them and like just get one just to have it. Just because you happen to take that action for some other reason and you had some extra food and stuff and you wanted the bonus. But the actual little like income track thing on that, like we're not going to get a lot of points out of it. But the second ones, well, you can get a lot of points out of those. So don't ignore those second level ones for sure, because that will contribute. The other ones you just kind of take as a nice to have. But don't take too many, because if you fill up your board with them, then you won't have space to put the good ones in. Okay. But yeah, so there is a lot to sort of tease apart with the game in terms of like all of the kind of different activities that you can do. So at the end of the day, it's a big kind of point salad. It's a big mechanics salad. All these different components, all these different pieces. You score points all these different ways. You go up these different tracks. And on the surface, it's like, that is like, you kind of been there, done that. But I do have a lot of fun playing this game, because you have all of these different sort of kind of paths to go through. So it's just fun to get that hand of cards and try to figure out what little kind of, efficiency, sort of bonus I can eke out of what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to do it in this worker placement thing that I'm doing right this second, or maybe that's going to set me up for the next one, or it's going to set me up for the eclipse phase or whatever, and just trying to eke out as much little like movements and little, pushing and pulling of all these different levers at some point in the game. So it's just all about that, and it's a lot of fun, and it's well illustrated, and it's got a kind of a fun theme. Everybody looks like they're having a good time, even though it's probably a really harsh environment that this is representing. So that makes it fun to do. So I would definitely recommend the game, and it's just one of those like pull a lot of levers types of things and just kind of see how this engine runs, and you kind of get right into it. Even though it's 4 rounds, like you're getting into it right away, and especially after you play it a couple of times, you can start to see like, get a lot of games, those first couple turns are sort of like, hey, you're getting going, but this, you can start to crank that engine pretty quickly. So that's neat. And so once you get the hang of the game, you get in, you get out, you can just pull a lot of levers and push a lot of buttons, and it's a very great presentation and package. So I recommend it. I recommend you at least take a look at it. Endless Winter. Thanks.